Saw was released in 2004 and is directed by James Wan and stars Cary Elwes, Danny Glover, Michael Emerson, and Leigh Whannell, who also penned the script. The film follows two strangers who awaken in a room with no recollection of how they got there, and soon discover they're pawns in a deadly game perpetrated by a notorious serial killer. Welcome back to another Halloween review, guys. I am a big fan of the Saw franchise, regardless of the overall quality of some of the films. This is a franchise that has always been a fun one for me to revisit over and over because even at their absolute worst, they have tried to maintain a narrative that has spanned 10 films, and I love how each film tries to add to the story in some meaningful way, regardless of how little it makes sense or how convoluted it ends up being. Regardless of all of that, this is a series I keep coming back to because I just find them fun. I love the mystery, I love the concept, and I really just love the mythology around the character of the Jigsaw Killer. However, before there was even a franchise to speak of, there was this first film that came out in 2004, and it still remains my favorite of all these films all these years later. And with the release of the 10th entry this year, I thought now would be the time to finally talk about one of my favorite horror franchises by starting with the one that started it all. But before we get into that, let's do what we always do here and go behind the scenes to see just how this film was made. Right out of film school, James Wan and Leigh Whannell wanted to write and finance a film together. Their inspiration for their first project was the independent film The Blair Witch Project because of its extremely low budget, as well as Darren Aronofsky's Pi, which was financed by the director as well. Afterwards, they worked on writing a script that would involve two actors in one room to keep the shoot relatively cheap. One idea they considered was two people stuck in an elevator, and the point of view being security camera footage. It was Wan who actually pitched the idea to Whannell of two men chained to opposite sides of a bathroom with a dead body in the middle of the floor as they try to figure out what has happened to them and how they got there, with the reveal at the end being the dead figure in the room has been alive the whole time and is the one that locked them in the room in the first place. The concept for the Jigsaw character didn't come until months later when Whannell started having migraines and was convinced it was a brain tumor. While in the waiting room, he began thinking about the Jigsaw character and what they might do if they learned they had only a few years to live, and combine that with Jigsaw putting people through situations where they have to choose their own fate. The intent of the filmmakers was not to make a torture film, but make the film more of a mystery thriller, while the later films focused more and more on the torture segments. Wan and Whannell initially spent $30,000 on the film, but the script they had developed required more funds, so they tried optioning off the script, but nobody took it. Realizing they need something more to sell the script, they provided $5,000 to make a 7-minute short film based on the script's reverse bear trap scene. After production on this wrapped in early 2003, the two met with producer Greg Hoffman, who watched the short and was enthralled by it. Shortly after, he showed the script and the short to his partners, and the group formed the horror production label Twisted Pictures. Afterwards, the producers gave Wan and Whannell creative control over their film and 25% of net profits. By the end, Saw ended up costing $1.2 million to shoot. Much of the cast that ended up joining the project were drawn to the uniqueness of the story compared to other things. They liked the setting and mystery element, and with actors like Cary Elwes and Danny Glover set to star, principal photography finally began on September 22nd of 2003 at Lacey Street Production Facility in Los Angeles for 18 days. The bathroom set was the only one built for the film. Everywhere else was shot on location. there was no time for Elwes and Winnell to rehearse their scenes so as not to conflict with other scenes being filmed, such as with Danny Glover and Michael Emerson, who only had a limited amount of days to shoot. They were on a very tight shooting schedule. Because of this, the film ended up being much grittier than originally intended due to the lack of time and money, and became an aesthetic of the film and part of its identity for the rest of the franchise. During editing, Wan discovered that he didn't have enough shots for the movie, and there were plenty of missing gaps. Because of this, he and editor Kevin Greutert created shots to mend together, such as making a shot look like surveillance camera footage or photographs. It was from these limitations the style of the film was created. Lionsgate would go on to pick up the worldwide distribution rights at the 2004 Sundance Film Festival just days before the film premiered on January 19th of 2004. And after the positive reactions to the film at Sundance, an October release was given and the film was edited so they could release it with an R rating. Saw went on to gross $103.9 million on a budget of $1.2 million, making it a huge success despite the C+ cinema score and mixed critical reviews. Many complained about the film's nihilism and crudeness, and also found the script convoluted and criticizing the flashbacks within flashbacks and the B-movie acting. But for some, it was these things that made the film for them, and since its release, the movie has been reevaluated multiple times and is considered a better film than maybe it was seen as initially, and in the scope of the entire franchise, is probably still its best entry to this day. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's go into my thoughts on the film. First off, I love this movie for many reasons. I find the concept super enticing, I find the mystery worthwhile and satisfying, and I love the filmmaking and the fact that they were able to make such an ambitious project on a tight budget. But yeah, sure, they had some help with funding eventually, but these kinds of low-budget movies inspire me differently than the big-budget ones. The big-budget movies show me what is possible with film and what I would love to strive for, but smaller movies show me what's feasible and what you can accomplish with such a small budget. And that's another reason I love Saw, which is entirely different for why I love the whole franchise. This film inspires me, and even through its many flaws and setbacks, I still think a good movie was made, and I love it so much I might even elevate it to great. It's easy to pick this film apart because it is convoluted. It is a grotesque and dirty movie. It does have some not great acting in it, and the editing can feel a little bit messy, as well as some of the storytelling. But I think that's what's so charming about it. It's a movie made by two friends, and the fact that they made a movie at all is an accomplishment. It has its problems here and there, but that never has bothered me. I'm just enraptured by the filmmaking and story and what they were able to do with all the time constraints that those narrative problems don't bother me. And I think a movie works when you don't really notice or pay attention to its problems, because there's plenty of films like that you just don't think about while watching, and this is one of those films. The time constraints made a film that feels like a labor of love by two people, and it created a style for the film that's all its own. Although I will say, yeah, Leigh Whannell's performance is kinda laughable on screen, but I'll cut him some slack because I know the behind-the-scenes troubles and him not being able to really rehearse with his co-star. And that will pretty much do it for my negatives. I wanted to get that stuff out of the way first because it's something that, to me, I recognize the film has flaws, but they don't really hinder any of my enjoyment of the film either. I just appreciate that a first-time director and writer were able to make this kind of film on a low budget, and it's just very inspiring for me. So, with that, let's continue with everything else pretty much. Something I think that Saul gets really right is the characters. I think Leigh Whannell and James Wan both have a knack for creating characters that are flawed, but also very likable, and you want to see them succeed and make it through whatever situation they're in. And Dr. Gordon and Adam are two deeply flawed characters that are also likable, and you want to see them make it out in the end. Adam is just a basic hired hand who takes pictures for money. He's kind of sleazy, but hey, someone has to make a living here. But Leigh Whannell, through his limited acting range, manages to make a character that's, in the end, at least likable and fun enough. And then you have Gordon, who is a much more complex character, who is dealing with a lot of family issues. He's in a bit of a downward slope in his marriage and is emotionally cheating on his wife. But he still does care for his wife, and especially his daughter. And it's through the horrible situation that he's in that he realizes how much he loves his family and the steps he's willing to take to make sure he gets back to them. They're not the only actors and characters that get to shine, though. We also have Danny Glover as Detective Tapp, who is on the hunt for the Jigsaw serial killer. And we see firsthand how the case changes him over time from a straight by-the-law cop into a bit of a vigilante of sorts after an accident that leads to his partner's death. Danny Glover is excellent and gives a really solid and grizzled old detective performance. And for the limited amount of time he was actually on set, he does a great job. And smaller performances, such as Shawnee Smith, who's only in the film for 2 scenes, but provides the film's signature scene that the rest of the franchise would use as a jumping off point, as she plays the drug addict Amanda, who is tested by Jigsaw to find a key for a reverse bear trap that's hooked to her face, and surviving the experience has led her to a new appreciation of her life. And that's the interesting goal of Jigsaw in the long run. He targets people that have made many mistakes in their life and puts them through a set of trials to overcome, to see if they have what it takes to escape their nightmare and perhaps have a new appreciation for their life. And that's really interesting to me. It's what separates Jigsaw from being something more akin to the killer in Seven, which this movie takes a lot of inspiration from. And the concept of going through a series of games and traps is a really neat idea, and we see a few of them in the movie, such as the reverse bear trap, but there's also the man that has to make his way through razor wire, and a man that has to find a combination written on the wall while holding a candle and having a flammable substance rubbed all over his body. But through all that, the film is truly about 2 people in a single room trying to figure out how they got there and try to escape. And the main conflict that Dr. Gordon and Adam have to go through is the heart of the movie. It's an elaborate set piece using a dirty bathroom with clues everywhere as the 2 learn about each other and what led them there. My favorite stuff is in the first 10 or so minutes, which is an uninterrupted scene of these 2 meeting each other, recognizing their predicament before eventually trying to do something about it and figure out who might be behind it, which leads us into an eventual staple of the franchise, flashbacks. I've always been a fan of puzzles, and Saw kind of reminds me of one of the staples of one of my favorite video game genres, horror, where you have to complete puzzles to access parts of the game. So in that sense, Saw is one of the first horror movies to really get one of the best aspects of horror games right. I also love the use of the quote-unquote Saw in the film. It's put there as a Chekhov's gun. We know it's going to be used to cut off their feet as they're chained to the bathroom floor, but we also know neither one is willing to do such a thing until things become too dire. And the actual violent sawing off of the foot scene manages to be extremely effective without the use of over-the-top amounts of gore. And I think that's what I appreciate about this film that gets thrown out the window in the sequels, and that is how subtle the violent acts are. We don't see shot-for-shot actions of people going through razor wire. We see a sped-up version that gives us the pain of the act while not showing us every bloody detail. When Gordon eventually cuts off his own foot, it's not violently shown, but you feel the pain from Carrie Elway's visceral performance. You feel the pain the character's feeling, and that's what makes this movie still to this day very effective. It's the implied violence and not the violence itself. I also want to praise the editing of this film, because after learning about the troubled production this film had with not having enough coverage, it's honestly a miracle that the film ended up working at all. Yet, through clever and unique editing choices, they managed to make a film that flows together and is unlike any film that I can think of. The closest thing the editing of Saw reminds me of is a music video, with the quick sporadic camera, like in the reverse bear trap scene with Amanda as the camera spins around her. It doesn't feel like something that would typically be in a movie, but it manages to add to the tension of the scene and informs us about the character's current state, as she is against the clock trying to make it through this one trap. This style would eventually be replicated in later entries, but by that point, it becomes simply a part of what makes a Saw film a Saw film. It's part of the style. But in this one, it manages to mean a little bit more, or at least that's what I think. There's other times, though, that the editing is used to give action to something that really doesn't have much action going on. As mentioned, this movie was on a tight budget, and in the third act of the film, there's a car chase that is created haphazardly through weird editing to give the illusion that a chase is happening. But it's really just two cars in a dark room. So the editing choices serve a dual purpose in the film. First, to inform us about the characters and their mental state, and a nice way of adding action to a very tightly budgeted film. Lastly, I wanted to bring up the movie's ending, which is all sorts of convoluted when you think about it, but is still a great twist that leads to one of the most memorable endings for a horror movie. But before we get to that, I want to bring up the tragedy of Dr. Gordon. The screenplay really puts the character through hell at the end of this movie, and he's desperately trying to get back to his family. His entire mission in the film has been to kill Adam, so he can finally see his family. In doing this, he cuts his foot off and shoots Adam, which doesn't end up killing him. But he uses the opportunity to try to make it out of the situation, and his promise to Adam is a heartbreaking one with some really good acting from Carrie Elway's. And then we get to the end of the film. Gordon has left, and Adam is left to learn that the dead body in the room has been the Jigsaw killer the whole time, and it was revealed earlier in the film that he likes to watch his victims play the games, and eventually Jigsaw gets up, locks Adam inside the bathroom as his screams echo as the credits play. There's many reasons why I think this ending works. For one, the twist is just one I really don't think you see coming. And I actually think the flashbacks, which have been criticized, add to the climax. Yeah, we could do without them, and it does end up over-explaining the movie's many twists, but it's fun watching how those twists play into the ending. I think it personally works, but what works most of all is the score by Charlie Clouser and the Hello Zepp theme. It's perfect, tense, and leads to a really climactic finale, and this theme would only improve as the series went on. The rest of the score is also good, with a grungy sound that only the early 2000s could grant us. But the theme at the end is what sticks with you and has become nothing short of iconic since the film's release. The This movie is great, and I don't really care what people say. It's an admirable attempt by some first-time filmmakers that wanted to prove themselves by making their first film together. It is amateurish in some respects. The movie is cluttered and overly complex, but the ideas, the passion, and some of the performances are truly inspiring and make it well worth the watch. And even when the franchise would take dips in quality, I think some of the best aspects of what makes this franchise so much fun still shines through. This one will always, in my eyes, be the best one. But it spawned a franchise that I can't help but love, even when some releases are not so good. And James Wan and Leigh Whannell would only improve in their respective fields as the years have gone on, and have managed to make some of my favorite horror projects of the past few decades. It's just really cool revisiting their ambitious start to see where it all began, and that's why I think Saw is still worth seeing even now. And with all that said, I'm going to give Saw an 8 out of 10. I hope you all enjoyed this Halloween review. I'm a big fan of this franchise, and particularly this film. And with the new film out, I had to give my thoughts on the one that started it all. But that's all I've got for you. What do you think of Saw? Let me know in the comments section below, and look forward to my next Halloween review as we look at a film that's supposedly based on a true story. There's a book written about it, and it came out in the 70s. I'll leave you to figure out what that movie is. But as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.